I've spent most of my life on the water. Fishing, diving, and boating were second nature to me. But no amount of experience prepares you for the kind of fear I faced that day. It started like any other Saturday. The ocean was calm, the sun gleaming off the waves, and the air carried that crisp, salty breeze I'd come to love. I'd recently bought a small fishing boat, a single-engine vessel with enough space for two, though I usually went alone. That morning, I set out before dawn to an area known for its deep-sea fish. It was miles offshore, but the rewards often made the long trip worth it. By mid-morning, I'd already caught 2 yellowfin tuna and a decent-sized mahi-mahi. I remember thinking how lucky I was. It isn't every day you hit the jackpot out here. Feeling ambitious, I decided to drift further into deeper waters, the kind few venture into without a larger crew or boat. The water was dark, darker than I'd ever seen. There's a point where the ocean turns from a welcoming blue to an unsettling black, and I had just crossed it. I dropped my line, adjusted my radio to a static-filled frequency, and waited. That's when I noticed the silence. The kind that presses on your ears. No birds, no wind, just the occasional slap of water against the hull. It felt wrong, but I brushed it off. This far out, it wasn't unusual to lose the sounds of life. After about an hour, my reel jerked violently. My line screamed as something massive took the bait. Grinning, I braced myself against the side of the boat, ready for the fight. Whatever it was strong, stronger than anything I'd ever hooked. My arms burned as I struggled to reel it in. The fish pulled, diving deeper, taking more line, and I held firm, determined not to lose it. But then, as suddenly as it had started, the tension disappeared. The line went slack. Confused, I reeled it back, expecting a broken line or mangled bait. Instead, the hook was clean, pristine, as if it had never been in the water. I felt a chill despite the sun beating down on me. Something about it didn't make sense. Shrugging it off, I reset the line and cast it back into the water. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. About an hour passed with no bites. Frustrated, I stood to stretch, and that's when I saw it. A shadow beneath the boat, massive and slow-moving. At first, I thought it was a whale. But whales surfaced to breathe, and this one didn't. It circled, staying just out of clear view, its shape distorted by the water's rippling surface. I leaned over the side, trying to get a better look. My heart pounded as I realized whatever it wasn't leaving. It circled again, closer this time, and I caught a glimpse of its outline. It was long, sleek, and unnatural. I pulled my line back in, not wanting to attract it. That's when the first thud hit. The boat rocked as if something had rammed it from below. I nearly lost my footing, grabbing the side to steady myself. Another thud came, harder this time, and the boat tilted dangerously. I scrambled to the controls, trying to start the engine, but it sputtered and died. Panic surged through me. I checked the fuel gauge, half full. There was no reason for it to stall. I tried again, but the engine refused to cooperate. Another thud. Then silence. The kind that makes your skin crawl. I scanned the water, heart racing, expecting the shadow to resurface. Instead, the boat began to spin slowly, as if caught in an invisible whirlpool. I leaned over the side, desperate to see what was happening. The water was darker than ever, almost opaque. Then, without warning, something large and pale shot past the hull. It was fast, too fast for me to make out any details, but its size was unmistakable. I grabbed the emergency oar and began paddling, hoping to put some distance between me and whatever was out there. The boat barely moved. The water felt thicker, like something was dragging against the hull. Then I heard it. A low, guttural sound that resonated through the water, like a deep hum mixed with grinding metal. It wasn't natural. It wasn't anything I'd ever heard before. The boat jolted again, this time with such force that I was thrown to the deck. My head smacked the edge of the seat, and for a moment, my vision blurred. When I came to, the humming was gone, replaced by the sound of splashing water. I looked up to see the shadow circling again, closer now. It was massive, easily the length of 2 buses. But what froze me wasn't its size. It was the way it moved, almost deliberate, as if it knew I was there. Adrenaline took over. I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit and aimed it at the water. My hands shook as I pulled the trigger. The flare shot out, hissing as it hit the surface. For a moment, the water lit up, and I saw it. It wasn't a fish. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't anything I could recognize. Pale, scarred skin stretched over a body that seemed to twist and ripple unnaturally. Its eyes, small, black, and unblinking, locked onto mine for what felt like an eternity before it vanished into the depths. I didn't wait. I paddled with every ounce of strength I had, not caring where I ended up, as long as it was away from there. Hours passed before I saw the faint outline of the coastline. By then, the sun was setting, and the ocean had returned to its unsettling calm. When I finally made it back to shore, I collapsed, shaking and exhausted. I tried to explain what happened, but who would believe me? A rogue wave, a large fish, those are the explanations people gave. But I know the truth. Something is out there, in the depths we dare not explore. It isn't a shark or a whale or anything we can classify. It's something older, something that doesn't want us there. And it's waiting. The ocean is a place of mystery, beauty, and danger. It's why I loved it and feared it in equal measure. Growing up on the coast, I spent more time on water than on land. I'd seen storms roll in without warning, fish scatter at unseen predators, and once, I even watched a rogue wave rise like a living wall to swallow a trawler whole. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened last summer. I had taken my sailboat, the Horizon, out for a solo journey to clear my head. Life on land had become too noisy, too suffocating. Out here, on the open water, there was only the rhythm of the waves and the whistle of the wind. I sailed out farther than usual, chasing the peace that only comes from leaving everything behind. By midday, I was deep into open water, surrounded by nothing but an endless expanse of blue. The air was warm, and the breeze steady, a perfect day for sailing. I anchored the boat, tossed out a line to fish, and leaned back with a cold drink, letting the sun warm my face. For hours, I was alone with my thoughts and the gentle rocking of the boat. It started around dusk. The sun was a molten disk slipping below the horizon when I noticed it. The eerie stillness. The wind had stopped, leaving the sails limp and lifeless. The water, once lively with ripples and the occasional splash of fish, had become unnaturally calm. It wasn't just quiet, it was silent. I stood up, scanning the horizon. No birds. No distant hum of passing ships. Just me and the silence. A deep unease settled in my gut. I'd been on the ocean long enough to know when something wasn't right. I decided to reel in my line and head back. But as I reached for the anchor, the boat jolted violently to the side, nearly throwing me overboard. My heart jumped into my throat as I grabbed the rail for balance. It felt like something had pushed the boat. I stared into the water, but it was too dark to see anything beneath the surface. I turned on the deck light, hoping to illuminate whatever was out there. The beam cut through the darkness, revealing nothing but the flat, glassy water. I shook my head, trying to convince myself it was a rogue current or some debris. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I fired up the engine, ready to leave. But as soon as I turned the key, the boat shook again, harder this time. My hands gripped the wheel as the vessel lurched forward, then stopped dead as if caught on something. The water around the boat began to ripple, forming slow, deliberate circles. My breath caught as I realized the ripples were too symmetrical, too precise to be caused by the wind or the tide. It was as if they were being made by something beneath me. I grabbed the flare gun, my only weapon, and stood at the edge of the boat. My voice cracked as I called out, "Who's there?" The only answer was the soft slap of water against the hull. Then, something rose from the depths. At first, it was just a shadow, faint and indistinct. But as it drew closer to the surface, my chest tightened. The shape was massive, easily larger than my boat. Long and sleek, it seemed to shift and ripple unnaturally, like a living shadow. I fired the flare into the water. The red glow illuminated it for just a moment, but it was enough. Its body was smooth and pale, with scars that crisscrossed its surface like jagged tattoos. But it was the eyes that froze me, cold, black, and unblinking, set deep into a face that looked almost human but wasn't. The creature didn't react to the flare. It hovered beneath the boat, its eyes locked on mine, studying me. My legs felt like they might give out. I'd read about giant squid, colossal sharks, even deep-sea fish that could swallow a man whole. This wasn't any of those. This was something else, something ancient. I stumbled backward, my heart racing, and fumbled with the engine again. It roared to life on the third try, and I slammed the throttle forward. The boat surged ahead, but the creature didn't follow. It stayed where it was, watching me go. I thought I was safe until the engine sputtered and died a few minutes later. I cursed, grabbing my flashlight to check the fuel line. That's when I saw it again, further out but keeping pace with the boat. It didn't swim like a fish or glide like a whale. It moved almost lazily, as if it knew I couldn't escape. Desperate, I reached for the emergency radio. Static greeted me when I turned it on. I tried every frequency, shouting into the MIC, but no one answered. The creature began to circle the boat again. Each pass was slower, more deliberate. I could hear faint creaks as the hull strained against the pressure of the water. Then it stopped, vanishing into the deep. Minutes passed. The silence returned, heavier than before. I didn't move, didn't breathe. Then, a sudden knock against the hull made me jump. It wasn't violent this time, just a tap, like a warning. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I grabbed the oar from the emergency kit and started paddling with all my strength, praying I was moving toward land. The hours blurred together, my muscles screaming with each stroke. When the sun finally rose, I was near enough to the coast to see the faint outline of trees. Relief washed over me, but it was short-lived. I glanced back at the open water, and for the briefest moment, I saw it again, a shadow slipping beneath the waves. I reached the shore and collapsed, my body trembling from exhaustion and fear. I told no one what I saw. Who would believe me? They'd say it was fatigue, a trick of the light, or my mind playing games. But I know what I saw. The ocean isn't ours. It's a place of things older, larger, and more terrifying than we can imagine. And whatever lives out there, it doesn't want us to know. When you grow up near the ocean, it becomes a part of you. The sound of the waves, the smell of salt, the endless horizon, they all feel like home. I thought I knew the sea. I thought I respected it. But respect isn't enough when you're faced with what lies beneath. It was supposed to be a straightforward trip. My friend Aaron and I were hired to deliver a small research buoy to a deep-sea monitoring station about 60 miles offshore. The client was some environmental agency tracking currents and marine life. They paid well and didn't ask questions, which suited us fine. The day started out calm. We loaded the boy onto my boat, the Mariner, a sturdy old vessel that had seen its share of storms. The weather forecast was clear, and the sea was flat as glass. We left the harbor at dawn, aiming to make the drop and return before nightfall. By midday, we were well into open water. The GPS showed we were near the drop site, a spot over an underwater trench so deep it had no official name, just a string of numbers. Aaron joked that it was the perfect place for a sea monster to hide. I laughed, but the thought lingered in the back of my mind. We deployed the boy with little trouble. It slid into the water and began its slow descent, tethered by a cable that stretched thousands of feet into the depths. Aaron monitored the system while I checked the charts. Everything was going smoothly. Then the boat shook. It wasn't a wave. It wasn't wind. It felt like something had struck us. Hard. I shot Aaron a look, but he was already staring at the water, his face pale. "What the hell was that?" he muttered. I leaned over the side, scanning the surface. Nothing. No debris, no disturbance. Just the same calm water we'd seen all day. "Probably a submerged log," I said, though I didn't believe it. Logs don't hit with that kind of force. We decided to check the boy's cable. Aaron reeled it in a few feet, and that's when we noticed the tension. The cable was taut, vibrating like a guitar string. Something was pulling on it from below. Aaron frowned. "It snagged on something. Something that moves." I asked. He didn't answer. I grabbed the controls and moved the boat slowly forward, hoping to free the cable. The tension didn't ease. If anything, it grew stronger. The boat groaned as if being pulled backward. I killed the engine, and Aaron tried reeling the cable in again, but it wouldn't budge. Then it snapped. The sound was like a gunshot, and the sudden release sent Aaron sprawling backward. I rushed to help him up, but my eyes were drawn to the water. The cable had disappeared, sucked into the deep, and the surface was churning as if something enormous had disturbed it. We stood there, frozen, watching the water settle. I wanted to turn the boat around and leave, but curiosity held me in place. Aaron grabbed the sonar monitor, hoping to get a glimpse of whatever had taken the cable. The screen flickered to life, displaying a series of lines and blips that represented the ocean floor and anything between. At first, it was the usual, a blank abyss stretching down into nothing. Then a shadow appeared. It was faint at first, a smudge on the screen, but it grew larger, clearer. Whatever it was massive. The sonar couldn't make out its shape, just its size, easily bigger than the boat. And it was rising. Fast. Aaron's voice was barely a whisper. "We need to leave." I didn't argue. I started the engine, but it sputtered and died. My hands shook as I tried again. Nothing. The boat wouldn't start. The shadow reached the surface. At first, all we saw was a ripple. Then a shape broke through, a long, pale form that glistened in the sunlight. It was smooth, almost featureless, except for scars that crisscrossed its body. It looked like it had been through battles, each mark a reminder of something worse than us. Then came the sound. A low, guttural groan that seemed to vibrate through the water and into the boat. It wasn't natural. It wasn't anything I'd heard before. It was a warning. The creature circled us, its body rippling beneath the surface like a living wave. It didn't seem to have fins or a tail, just an endless, twisting mass. Aaron grabbed the flare gun, his hands trembling, and fired into the water. The flare hissed and sank, illuminating the creature for a brief moment. Its eyes. That's what I remember most. Two deep, black pits that seemed to pull the light out of the world. They locked onto us, unblinking, as if assessing whether we were worth the effort. The creature disappeared as suddenly as it had appeared. The water calmed, the ripples fading into nothing. For a moment, I thought it was over. Then the boat lurched violently to the side. I grabbed the rail, shouting for Aaron, but he was already sliding across the deck. Something was underneath us, pushing up, tilting the boat at an impossible angle. I screamed at Aaron to grab the radio, but he was too busy holding on for dear life. The boat rocked again, and I lost my footing, slamming into the controls. The engine roared to life, and I didn't hesitate. I gunned it, the boat surging forward. The creature followed. I didn't look back, but I could feel it. The water churned behind us, and the boat groaned as if fighting to escape. Aaron fired another flare, but it made no difference. The creature stayed with us, just out of sight, until we reached the shallows. The change was immediate. The water calmed, and the boat steadied. I slowed the engine and turned back, but the creature was gone. Just the open ocean behind us, as if nothing had happened. We didn't speak on the way back to the harbor. What could we say? By the time we docked, the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the water. Aaron looked at me, his face pale. "We don't tell anyone," he said. I nodded. Who would believe us? But as I lay awake that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that it was still out there, waiting. The ocean isn't just a vast, empty expanse. It's alive, ancient, and hiding things we aren't meant to see. And some of them are watching us, too. The ocean was unusually calm that day, like glass stretching infinitely beneath a hazy sky. My buddy, Carter, and I were heading out to a remote patch of water we'd fished before, a secret spot where the catch was always plentiful. It was over the edge of a deep trench that plunged farther than our sonar could read. Locals called it the silent current because of the eerie stillness that surrounded it, no matter the weather. Carter loved the spot, and I didn't mind the isolation. But something about that name always made me uneasy. We reached the coordinates by mid-morning, dropped anchor, and got to work. Fish were biting like crazy, snapper, grouper, even a few tuna. By noon, the cooler was brimming, and Carter was already cracking a beer to celebrate. The sun glared down, and the water shimmered like liquid silver. That's when I noticed it, the current. It was subtle at first, a gentle tug on the anchor line, but it grew stronger with each passing minute. By the time I pointed it out to Carter, the line was pulled taut, vibrating like a plucked string. "Must be an undertow," Carter said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence. "We're fine. The anchor's holding." But it didn't feel fine. The current wasn't just pulling us. It was circling, dragging the water into a slow, hypnotic whirlpool. The surface remained smooth, but below, you could see the distortion, like heat waves rising off asphalt. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Let's pull up the anchor and head back," I said. Carter scoffed. "We're miles out. It's just a current. Relax." Still, he agreed to reel in the lines. As he worked, I turned to the sonar to check the depth. What I saw made my stomach twist. The screen flickered, and the usual clear outline of the trench had vanished. Instead, there was a shadow, a massive, shapeless form, hovering just below the boat. "Carter, come look at this," I said, my voice tight. "What is it?" he asked, peering over my shoulder. The moment he saw the screen, the color drained from his face. "Is that a shoal?" "No shoal moves like that," I said. The shadow wasn't stationary. It pulsed, shifting and expanding, as if alive. And it was rising. Without a word, Carter started pulling up the anchor. The chain rattled as it came up, but then it stopped, jerking so hard it nearly knocked him off balance. It stuck, he said, straining against the line. Cut it, I said. My voice was sharper than I intended, but panic was clawing at my chest. He hesitated, then grabbed the knife and sawed through the rope. The moment it snapped, the boat lurched, tilting sharply to one side. We both fell, sliding across the deck as the water around us churned violently. The shadow was at the surface now. It wasn't a single creature but a mass, hundreds, maybe thousands, of shapes moving together in perfect synchronization. They looked like eels but larger, longer, their bodies undulating in a way that made my skin crawl. Their skin was pale, almost translucent, and their eyes, dozens of them, glowed faintly in the dim light filtering through the water. Carter scrambled to his feet and grabbed the throttle. The engine roared to life, and we sped forward, the bow cutting through the water like a knife. But the mass followed, spreading out like an enormous net. They're herding us, I said, realization dawning with a cold, sinking feeling. To way! Carter shouted, his voice barely audible over the roar of the engine. The question was answered moments later. Ahead, the water began to churn violently, spiraling downward into a massive vortex. The silent current. It wasn't a natural phenomenon. It was a trap. Turn around, I yelled. Carter spun the wheel, but the current was too strong. The boat was dragged sideways, the engine straining against the pull. The creatures surrounded us, their pale forms darting in and out of view beneath the waves. One of them surfaced, slamming into the side of the boat with a force that sent us both sprawling. Another struck the hull, then another. The sound was deafening, metal groaning under the weight of their attacks. The vortex was getting closer. I grabbed the emergency flare gun and fired into the water. The flare hissed as it sank, illuminating the creatures for a brief moment. Their bodies writhed away from the light, but it only seemed to anger them. One of them lunged, breaching the surface. Its body was longer than the boat, its mouth lined with rows of needle-like teeth. It snapped at the railing, splintering the wood before disappearing again. Get to the cabin, Carter shouted. I crawled toward the small shelter, my heart pounding in my chest. The boat tilted again, the vortex pulling us closer. I clung to the doorframe as Carter fought with the controls, his face drenched in sweat. Then the engine died. Silence. The only sound was the roar of the water around us and the thudding of my heart in my ears. The boat spun, caught in the vortex's grip, as the creatures circled us like sharks. Carter grabbed the last flare and fired it directly into the water. For a moment, the creatures scattered, their glowing eyes disappearing into the depths. It gave us just enough time to deploy the life raft. Go, he yelled, shoving me toward it. What about you? I shouted. I'll be right behind you. I didn't believe him, but there was no time to argue. I leapt into the raft and paddled as hard as I could, the vortex pulling me backward with every stroke. I looked back to see Carter still on the boat, a harpoon in his hands. The last thing I saw was the boat tipping, its bow disappearing into the whirlpool. Carter stood at the stern, his harpoon raised, as the creatures closed in. Then he was gone. The current released me as quickly as it had taken hold. The raft drifted aimlessly, the ocean calm once more. I floated for hours, watching the sun rise over an empty horizon, the water around me eerily still. They never found Carter or the boat. I told the Coast Guard everything, but they dismissed it as shock and exhaustion. I don't blame them. Sometimes, I wish I didn't believe it myself. But late at night, when I close my eyes, I see the vortex, the pale, writhing shapes, and Carter's face as he disappeared into the depths. And I know that the silent current is still out there, waiting for its next victim. The ocean had always been my escape. When life got too loud, I'd head out alone in my small boat, the Meridian, and let the endless blue swallow me. That day, I planned to push farther out than usual, beyond the continental shelf, where the water turns an impossible shade of navy and the bottom is miles below. It was supposed to be a challenge. I wanted to see if I could reel in something massive, tuna, maybe even a swordfish. I had a new rod, plenty of bait, and just enough courage to match my ambition. By mid-morning, I was well beyond sight of land, the horizon empty in every direction. The solitude felt intoxicating. The first few hours were uneventful. The sun was high, the sea calm, and the only sounds were the gentle slap of waves against the hull and the occasional cry of a gull. I drifted, my line trailing lazily in the water, waiting for something to bite. It wasn't until mid-afternoon that the first strike came. My rod bent sharply, the reel spinning as the line screamed out into the depths. I grabbed it, bracing myself against the side of the boat. Whatever was on the other end was strong, stronger than anything I'd ever hooked before. I fought it for nearly an hour, my arms burning with effort. Every time I thought I was making progress, it surged again, dragging the line farther out. Sweat dripped down my face as I gritted my teeth, determined not to lose whatever this was. Finally, I saw it, just a flash of silver deep below, like a glint of sunlight through dark water. It was massive, easily 6 feet long, thrashing violently as it neared the surface. But as it came closer, something else caught my eye. The water around the fish was moving, churning, as though something far larger was just beneath it. My stomach dropped. The fish wasn't fighting me anymore. It was fighting something else. Then I saw it. At first, I thought it was a shark. But as the shape materialized, I realized it was far too large. Its silhouette was enormous, sleek, and oddly featureless. It moved with terrifying grace, circling the fish before darting in. In one swift motion, it clamped down on my catch, dragging it, and my line, into the depths. My rod snapped in half, and I stumbled backward, nearly losing my footing. The water stilled for a moment, the surface eerily calm. Then, the boat rocked violently as something large bumped against the hull. I grabbed the railing, my heart hammering in my chest. I peered over the side, my breath catching in my throat. Below me, the water was dark, but I could see it. A massive, shadowy figure, easily twice the length of my boat. It wasn't a whale, and it wasn't any fish I'd ever seen. Its body was smooth, almost featureless, and its movements were too precise, too deliberate. I don't know how long I stood there, staring. It didn't seem interested in me, at least, not yet. It circled the boat lazily, its massive bulk creating ripples that rocked me back and forth. My mind raced. What was it? Why was it here? And, most importantly, how could I get away? I scrambled to the controls and started the engine, my hands trembling. The motor roared to life, and I turned the boat toward the horizon, pushing the throttle as far as it would go. The boat lurched forward, cutting through the waves, but the creature followed. It didn't chase me in the way a predator might. It didn't rush or lunge. It simply glided beneath the surface, matching my speed effortlessly. Occasionally, it would dart ahead, crossing under the boat as if studying me. I felt like a mouse being toyed with by a cat. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the water. I checked my GPS, but the screen flickered, the signal lost. Panic set in as I realized I didn't even know which direction I was heading anymore. The creature bumped the boat again, harder this time. I nearly lost control as the bow dipped into the waves. I glanced over my shoulder, and for the first time, I saw it fully breach the surface. Its body was long and smooth, with no fins or scales, and its color shifted in the fading light. A dark, iridescent sheen that seemed almost unnatural. It had no eyes that I could see, just a featureless head that rose and fell with a splash. I screamed, slamming the throttle forward. The engine whined in protest, but the boat surged ahead. I didn't care where I was going anymore. I just wanted to get away. The chase went on for what felt like hours. My fuel gauge was dangerously low, and the creature was still there, lurking beneath the surface. It never attacked outright, but its presence was suffocating. It was as if it was waiting for something, for me to make a mistake. Then, as suddenly as it had appeared, it was gone. The water stilled. The horizon was empty. I slowed the boat, my chest heaving with exhaustion. Had it given up? Or was it simply toying with me again? I didn't dare turn off the engine. Instead, I drifted, scanning the water for any sign of movement. The night was pitch black by the time I spotted the faint glow of the harbor lights. Relief flooded through me as I guided the boat toward the docks, my hands still shaking. When I finally stepped onto solid ground, I collapsed to my knees, my legs too weak to hold me. I never told anyone the full story. Who would believe me? The official report said my rod snapped due to a large catch, and I ran out of fuel while heading back. No one questioned it. But I haven't been back on the ocean since. Sometimes, late at night, I dream of that dark shape gliding beneath me, silent and patient. And I wonder if it's still out there, waiting for me to return. The sea was flat, a mirror reflecting the pale blue sky. I was 20 miles off the coast, floating above a seamount known as Devil's Ridge. Local fishermen warned me against coming here. They spoke of bad luck, strange disappearances, and boats vanishing without a trace. I dismissed it as superstition. To me, the ridge was an untouched paradise, teeming with life, a dream for a solo fisherman like myself. It was late morning when I arrived. I anchored my boat and prepared my gear. The sonar showed schools of fish swirling below, a dense mass of life above the sharp underwater peaks. The sight filled me with excitement, and I cast my line with anticipation. The first catch came quickly, a decent-sized yellowtail snapper. The second was even better, a grouper heavy enough to make my arms ache. By noon, the cooler was half full, and I was congratulating myself on ignoring the locals' warnings. The sun was warm, the water calm, and the only sound was the rhythmic slap of waves against the hull. Then the air changed. It's hard to describe, but it felt like the world had taken a deep breath and was holding it. The wind stilled, and the gentle rocking of the boat ceased. Even the gulls, which had been circling overhead, vanished. I felt the hair on my arms rise, and a chill crept down my spine. That's when I noticed the silence. The sea, which had been alive with the splashes of fish and the hum of insects, was now utterly still. I peered over the side, and for the first time, I realized how clear the water was. I could see straight down, past the schools of fish, to the dark shadow of the ridge below. And something was moving. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, a ripple or distortion in the water. But the shadow was real, sliding along the seafloor with a deliberate, almost predatory grace. It wasn't a shark. It was too large and moved too smoothly. I stared, transfixed, as it spiraled upward, its dark form growing larger and larger as it ascended. Panic jolted me into action. I reeled in my line, hands trembling. The rod shook violently, and for a moment, I thought I'd snagged something massive. But when I pulled it free, the hook was bare, no fish, no bait, just a frayed line as if it had been severed by something sharp. I started the engine, desperate to leave, but it sputtered and died. I tried again. Nothing. The boat bobbed aimlessly, trapped in the stillness. My heart pounded as I scrambled for the oars, but before I could grab them, the boat lurched violently. Something was underneath me. I froze, gripping the edge of the boat. The shadow had reached the surface now, and I could see it clearly. It was a creature, though nothing like any sea life I'd ever encountered. Its body was long and sleek, with ridges that shimmered faintly in the light. It had no visible eyes or mouth, just smooth, undulating flesh that seemed to ripple with purpose. It circled the boat, brushing against the hull with enough force to make me stagger. The water around it seemed to vibrate, distorting the light and making the creature hard to focus on. I felt a deep, resonant hum in my chest, as if the ocean itself was alive and warning me to leave. I grabbed the flare gun from the emergency kit and aimed it at the water. My hands shook so badly that I nearly dropped it. With a deep breath, I fired. The flare hit the water, illuminating the creature for a split second. What I saw made my stomach churn. Its body was covered in translucent, gelatinous ridges, and through them, I could see the faint outline of something moving inside. It was as if the creature wasn't a single organism but a colony, a host to countless smaller forms writhing within it. The flare sank, and the light faded. The creature reacted, darting beneath the boat and striking it with such force that I was thrown to the deck. The impact left me stunned, my ears ringing. When I scrambled to my feet, the creature was gone. The silence returned, deeper now, almost suffocating. I scanned the water, my breath coming in short, panicked gasps. The boat rocked gently, as if mocking my fear. Then, I felt it again, that hum, low and resonant, vibrating through the wood beneath my feet. The creature breached directly in front of me. It rose out of the water like a mountain, its ridges shimmering in the sunlight. For a moment, I was paralyzed, staring at the massive, alien form towering above me. Then it crashed down, sending a wave of water over the boat and nearly capsizing it. I clung to the railing, coughing and sputtering. The boat listed dangerously, water pouring into the hull. Desperation took over. I grabbed the oars and began to row, my muscles screaming in protest. The creature followed, its movements slow and deliberate, as if it was toying with me. I rowed until my arms gave out, but no matter how far I went, the creature stayed with me, its dark form circling beneath the surface. I felt its presence, an oppressive weight pressing down on me, as if the sea itself wanted me gone. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the creature vanished. The wind returned, and the water rippled with the familiar patterns of waves. The engine sputtered to life, and I wasted no time, steering the boat toward the faint glow of the distant shoreline. When I finally reached the harbor, I collapsed onto the dock, my body trembling with exhaustion. No one believed my story, of course. They said I'd spent too long in the sun, that I'd imagined it all. But I know what I saw. I haven't been back to Devil's Ridge since. Some nights, though, I wake up in a cold sweat, hearing that low, resonant hum. And I wonder if it's still out there, gliding silently through the depths, waiting for me to return. The open ocean always drew me in. No land in sight, no noise but the slap of waves against the hull, and no one to bother you. It was freedom in its purest form. That's why I set out alone that morning, armed with nothing but a packed lunch, a few fishing rods, and my old boat, the Gull's Cry. I wasn't looking for anything specific, just the thrill of being out there, beyond where most dared to go. The weather was perfect. Clear skies, a steady breeze, and calm seas. My plan was simple. Head out about 30 miles offshore, find a promising spot, and fish until the sun dipped low. By midday, I'd found my place. The water here was darker, a deep, almost black blue that hinted at incredible depth. My fish finder showed activity below, schools of something big. I grinned and baited my line. The first few hours were uneventful, though I didn't mind. I could see dolphins in the distance, their sleek forms cutting through the water. A few gulls circled above me, their cries the only sound breaking the quiet. I was at peace. Then I noticed something odd. The dolphins were gone. So were the gulls. The only sound was the soft creak of my boat. It wasn't a sudden change. It crept up on me, like a fog rolling in. The air felt different, heavier, as if the ocean was holding its breath. I shook it off and focused on my line. I was here to fish, after all, not to spook myself with silly thoughts. But then my reel began to whine. Something big had taken the bait. Grinning, I braced myself and began to reel it in. The fight was immediate and fierce. Whatever I'd hooked was strong. My arms burned as I struggled to pull it closer. The rod bent dangerously, and I was forced to use my entire body to keep from losing it. Finally, I saw a flash of silver deep below. A tuna, I thought, a big one. But as it came closer, I realized I was wrong. This wasn't a tuna. It was too long, too sleek, and the way it moved, it wasn't panicked or thrashing. It swam with purpose. Then it was gone. My line went slack, and I almost fell backward. I cursed, thinking I'd lost it. But when I reeled the line in, I saw the hook was still intact, the bait gone, and the end of the line frayed as if it had been severed by something sharp. I stared at the water, uneasy. That's when I noticed the shadows. Beneath my boat, the water was darker than it should have been. It wasn't just deep, it was moving. Something massive was below me, a shape so large that it seemed impossible. It didn't look like a whale or any other sea creature I knew. It was featureless, just a vast, shifting shadow. I told myself it was just my imagination, a trick of the light. But then my boat lurched. Not a gentle rock from a wave, but a sharp, deliberate shove, as if something had hit it from below. My stomach twisted. I grabbed the railing and peered over the side. The water was calm, almost eerily so. But the shadow was still there, circling the boat. It moved slowly, deliberately, like a predator sizing up its prey. I started the engine, my hands shaking. The motor roared to life, and I turned the boat toward the horizon, pushing the throttle as far as it would go. The boat surged forward, cutting through the water, but the shadow followed. It didn't chase me outright. It didn't need to. It stayed just out of sight, a looming presence beneath the surface. Every so often, I'd feel a bump, a reminder that it was still there. My heart pounded as I gripped the wheel, scanning the horizon for any sign of land. The hours dragged on, the sun dipping lower in the sky. I had no idea how far I'd traveled or if I was even heading in the right direction. My GPS was useless. It flickered and died shortly after I started the engine. All I could do was keep moving, hoping I'd outrun whatever was following me. Then, as the last light of day faded, the shadow disappeared. The water was empty, still, and silent. Relief washed over me, though it was short-lived. The boat sputtered and slowed. I checked the fuel gauge and swore under my breath. I was almost out. I shut off the engine, letting the boat drift. The silence was deafening, but at least the shadow was gone. I slumped against the seat, exhaustion overtaking me. But the calm didn't last. The boat rocked violently, throwing me to the deck. I scrambled to my feet, my heart racing. Something was underneath me again, something bigger than before. The shadow rose slowly, its form breaking the surface. I didn't get a clear look, but I saw enough. It wasn't a whale or a shark or anything natural. Its body was smooth and dark, and it shimmered faintly in the moonlight. It moved with a terrible grace, sliding past the boat with a low, resonant hum that I felt in my chest. It didn't attack. It didn't need to. Its presence alone was enough to paralyze me with fear. I could only watch as it sank back into the depths, leaving the water still once more. When the sun rose, I was still drifting, my body stiff and cold. A passing fishing boat spotted me and towed me back to shore. I didn't tell them what I'd seen. Who would believe me? They'd say it was fatigue, dehydration, or an overactive imagination. But I know what I saw. The ocean is vast and ancient, a place we barely understand. There are things out there, things we aren't meant to find, or that aren't meant to find us. I haven't been back since. Even now, years later, I can't look at the sea without feeling that heavy, oppressive silence. I don't think I ever will. There's a reason people don't venture far into the open ocean alone. It's not just the isolation or the endless horizon that unnerves you. It's the realization that out there, you're utterly insignificant. I learned that the hard way last summer, 40 miles off the coast of Oregon. I was chasing albacore tuna, my favorite target during the season. The sea was calm, the sky clear. I'd spent months preparing my small boat, the Mariner, for this trip. The thrill of the chase and the promise of a hefty haul kept me coming back every year. This time, though, something felt different. I was trolling along a known hotspot when my sonar picked up movement. A massive school, deeper than I expected. I smiled, adjusted my rig, and set my lines. The first strike came within minutes, the reel screaming as a tuna bolted with the bait. It was a good fight, and when I hauled the fish on board, its silvery body gleamed in the sun. It was bigger than I'd hoped, a great start to the day. But as I prepped for the next cast, I noticed something strange. The water beneath me, previously a vibrant blue, had darkened. Not a cloud in sight, yet the surface seemed off. Like something was shifting below. I brushed it off as a trick of the light and got back to work. But as I reeled in the next fish, the tension on the line felt odd. Heavy, but not the kind of fight a tuna usually gives. When I finally brought it up, my stomach twisted. The tuna was dead, its body limp and pale. Something had taken a massive bite out of it. A clean cut, too large for any predator I knew. The edges of the wound were smooth, almost surgical. I stared at the water, suddenly uneasy. That's when the boat shifted. It wasn't a wave or the normal rocking of the sea. It was a deliberate jolt, as if something enormous had brushed against the hull. My heart raced. I leaned over the edge, peering into the water. The surface was calm, almost eerily so. No ripples, no bubbles, just endless black. Then, the current changed. It was subtle at first, a pull beneath the boat. I adjusted the anchor, thinking it was just a deep-sea current shifting. But the pull grew stronger, the boat dragging sideways despite the anchor holding firm. I started the engine, hoping to move into calmer waters, but it sputtered and died. I cursed and grabbed the emergency oars. As I paddled, the pull increased, almost like an invisible hand dragging the boat toward something. The harder I worked, the stronger it became. Sweat poured down my face as I strained against the unseen force. Then I saw it. A shadow beneath the water, impossibly large. At first, I thought it was a whale, but it didn't move like one. It was too smooth, too deliberate. The outline was sleek, featureless, and unnervingly silent. I froze, gripping the oars, my breath caught in my throat. The shadow rose slowly, passing directly beneath the boat. My gut told me to stay still, but panic won out. I grabbed a flare gun, firing it into the water. The red light illuminated the shadow for just a moment, but what I saw left me cold. The creature was massive, its body like polished stone, dark and reflective. It had no eyes, no fins, just a sleek, alien form. Its presence was overwhelming, as if the sea itself had come alive to swallow me whole. The flare fizzled out, plunging me back into darkness. The boat jolted again, this time with enough force to knock me off my feet. I scrambled to my knees, clutching the edge of the deck, my mind racing. I needed to get out. Now. I managed to get the engine running again, the sputter of life giving me a flicker of hope. I pushed the throttle to full, the boat lurching forward. But the current wouldn't let me go. The shadow moved with me, matching my speed, always just beneath the surface. Hours passed, or maybe minutes. It was impossible to tell. My arms ached, my throat was dry, and my mind raced with panic. The horizon never seemed to change. The endless expanse of water stretched on, mocking me with its emptiness. Then, as suddenly as it began, the current stopped. The shadow disappeared, sinking back into the depths. The water was calm again, the sky just as clear as before. But I didn't trust it. I kept the engine running, steering toward where I thought the shore might be. I didn't stop until the faint outline of land appeared on the horizon. Only then did I allow myself to breathe, my muscles finally relaxing. When I reached the dock, I tied up the boat with trembling hands and stumbled onto solid ground. I told no one what had happened. Who would believe me? They'd laugh it off as exhaustion or a fisherman's tall tale. But I know what I saw, what I felt. The ocean is vast, mysterious, and unforgiving. There's something out there, something that doesn't belong in the light of day. I haven't gone back since. The mariner sits in dry dock, gathering dust, while I try to convince myself that it was all in my head. But on quiet nights, when the wind is still, I can still feel the pull of the current, dragging me back to that silent, endless black. I know I'll never forget. And I'll never be truly safe. The sea has always called to me. Growing up in a small coastal town, I spent every spare moment fishing or diving. It was my escape, my sanctuary. But after that day, the ocean became something else entirely. A vast, unknowable void. It was a solo trip, like most of my excursions. The plan was simple. Head out about 50 miles to a drop-off where the seabed plummeted into an abyss, a hotspot for big game fish. I'd been there a dozen times before, always coming back with a cooler full of tuna or mahi-mahi. That morning, the weather was perfect, calm seas, a gentle breeze, and a clear horizon. Nothing hinted at what was to come. By mid-morning, I was on location, my small boat, Sea Wanderer, anchored just above the drop-off. I cast my lines, checked the sonar, and waited. The water here was an intense, almost hypnotic blue, the kind that made you feel like you were floating in the sky. The sonar pinged steadily, showing activity below. I grinned, ready for a productive day. The first few hours passed uneventfully. I reeled in a few small catches but nothing worth keeping. Then, around noon, I noticed something odd. The sonar screen went blank, no fish, no activity, just an empty void. I tapped the display, thinking it was a malfunction, but the equipment was fine. It was as if everything below had vanished. The air grew heavy, almost oppressive, and the gentle rocking of the boat ceased. The ocean was glassy, unnaturally still. Even the occasional seabirds had disappeared. The silence was absolute, broken only by my own breathing. Then came the sound, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the water and up into the hull. It wasn't mechanical, but organic, like the groan of something impossibly large shifting in the depths. I froze, gripping the edge of the boat, my pulse hammering in my ears. I peered over the side, into the water. It was impossibly clear, and as I stared, I realized how deep it was. The drop-off below me seemed to stretch endlessly, fading into an inky blackness. And from that blackness, something began to emerge. At first, it was just a shadow, a faint, indistinct blur. But as it rose, it took shape. A massive, dark form, longer than my boat, its edges smooth and almost translucent. It moved with deliberate grace, gliding upward as if pulled by some unseen force. I couldn't move. My hands gripped the rail so tightly that my knuckles turned white. The shadow grew larger, closer, until it was directly beneath me. My heart pounded as I tried to comprehend what I was seeing. It wasn't a whale or a shark or anything I could recognize. It had no fins, no eyes, no discernible features, just a sleek, alien body that shimmered faintly in the dim light. Then it stopped. Hovering just below the boat, it radiated an uncanny stillness, as if studying me. The low hum grew louder, resonating in my chest, making it hard to breathe. I scrambled for my engine, my fingers fumbling with the ignition. The motor sputtered and roared to life, and I slammed the throttle forward. The boat lurched ahead, the wake churning behind me. For a moment, I thought I was safe. But then the shadow moved, faster than I could have imagined. It glided alongside the boat, keeping pace effortlessly. I pushed the engine harder, the bow cutting through the water like a knife, but it didn't matter. The shadow stayed with me, its presence an unbearable weight. The hum grew louder, deafening now, and the boat began to shake violently. I thought the hull would split apart. I turned sharply, hoping to throw it off, but the maneuver only made things worse. The shadow dove beneath the boat, and I felt a massive jolt as something struck the keel. I lost control. The boat spun, the engine whining as it strained against the water. I was thrown to the deck, my head slamming against the railing. Dazed, I crawled toward the controls, desperate to regain control. When I looked back into the water, the shadow was gone. The silence returned, oppressive and heavy. The sea was still again, eerily calm. I sat there, trembling, unable to process what had just happened. The sonar remained blank, the steady ping now a haunting reminder of the emptiness below. Then I felt it, a pull, subtle at first, then stronger. The boat began to drift backward, as if caught in a current. But there were no currents here, not this far out. I grabbed the wheel, trying to steer, but the pull grew stronger, dragging me toward the drop-off. Panic set in. I fired up the engine again, pushing it to its limits. The boat groaned under the strain, but I managed to break free of the invisible grip. I didn't stop until the coastline appeared on the horizon, the familiar outline of land filling me with relief. When I reached the harbor, I tied up the boat and sat on the dock for what felt like hours, staring at the water. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was still watching me, even here, even now. I told no one about what happened. Who would believe me? They'd laugh, call it a fisherman's tall tale, or blame it on exhaustion. But I know what I saw, what I felt. The ocean is vast, ancient, and filled with things we can't begin to understand. I haven't been back since. The sea wanderer sits in dry dock, gathering dust, while I try to convince myself it was all a hallucination, a product of too much sun and too little sleep. But every time I close my eyes, I hear that hum, deep and resonant, pulling me back to the edge of the abyss. And I know I'll never truly escape it. I've spent my whole life on the water. As a commercial fisherman, the ocean was both my livelihood and my home. But after what happened last year, I can't even look at the waves without a chill running down my spine. It started like any other trip. The sky was clear, the sea calm. I'd taken the Calypso, my 30-foot trawler, out to a remote area of the Pacific, 60 miles from shore. The fishing had been slow lately, and I needed a big haul to make up for lost time. I planned to stay out overnight and push further than usual to find untouched waters. By noon, I reached the drop-off, where the shallow seabed fell away into a dark abyss. My fish finder showed promising signs, schools of something big moving beneath me. Grinning, I dropped my nets and set up for a long afternoon. The first few hours were productive. The nets came up heavy, full of glistening tuna and mackerel. The sun hung high, casting a golden glow over the endless blue. Everything felt right. But as the afternoon wore on, something shifted. The wind died completely, leaving the air heavy and still. The waves flattened, turning the ocean into a glassy mirror. I paused, wiping sweat from my brow, and scanned the horizon. No other boats. No birds. Just an eerie emptiness. Shrugging off the unease, I focused on my work. The fish finder began pinging again, this time showing a single, massive object below me. I frowned, adjusting the settings to get a clearer read. The shape was enormous, far larger than any school of fish. It wasn't moving like a whale or a shark either. It was just there. Curiosity got the better of me. I dropped one of my heavier lines, baited with mackerel, and let it sink deep. The real word as the line unspooled, disappearing into the dark water. Minutes passed, then an hour. Nothing. Just as I was about to give up, the line went taut. The rod bent sharply, and the reel screamed as whatever was on the other end bolted downward. My heart leapt. This was no ordinary catch. It was massive. I braced myself and began reeling it in, muscles straining as the line fought against me. The boat tilted slightly, the weight of the thing testing its balance. Sweat dripped down my face as I worked, my hands raw from the rope. Then, just as suddenly as it had hit, the line went slack. I cursed, pulling it in, expecting to find the bait gone. But when the end of the line came into view, I froze. The hook was intact, but the steel leader was shredded, as if something with razor-sharp teeth had bitten through it. I stared at the water, my stomach knotting. This far out, there was no telling what lurked beneath. Sharks were a possibility, but not ones that left marks like this. And the size of the shadow on the fish finder, it didn't add up. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery hues, I decided to pack it in. I pulled up the nets and prepared to head back. But before I could start the engine, the boat rocked violently. I grabbed the railing, heart pounding. Another hit, harder this time, tilted the boat to one side. My equipment crashed to the deck as I scrambled to stay upright. I peered over the edge, but the water was dark and still. That's when I saw it. A shadow, enormous and featureless, passed beneath the boat. It moved slowly, almost lazily, but its size was staggering. It had to be at least twice the length of my trawler. My breath caught in my throat as I tried to make sense of it. Then came the sound, a low, resonant hum that seemed to vibrate through the hull and into my chest. It wasn't mechanical, but natural, like the groan of something ancient. I fumbled for the ignition, starting the engine with shaking hands. The hum grew louder, the water around the boat rippling despite the calm. I pushed the throttle, the boat lurching forward. The shadow followed. It didn't move like a predator chasing prey. It simply drifted beneath me, keeping pace, as if it was curious, or warning me. Every instinct screamed at me to go faster, but I knew pushing the engine too hard out here could leave me stranded. For hours, it stayed with me. I could see it just below the surface, a dark mass that blocked out the moonlight. Whenever I veered off course, it would nudge the boat gently, almost like it was guiding me. By the time the coastline came into view, the shadow began to sink. Slowly, it descended into the abyss, fading into the black. The hum faded with it, leaving me in stunned silence. When I finally reached the dock, I tied up the boat with trembling hands and collapsed onto the pier. My head spun with questions. What had I seen? Why hadn't it attacked? I haven't been able to return to those waters. I tried to research deep-sea creatures, but nothing matches what I experienced. Some nights, I dream about that shadow, the hum vibrating in my bones. The ocean is vast, more than we can ever comprehend. And in its depths, there are things that don't care for our understanding. They care only for their domain, and for keeping us out of it.